Please join me in welcoming our guest and our inquisitor.
But well, let's start from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you're from, where you were educated. What role did the arts play in your early life?
Well, I come from a small town in southeast Missouri called Sykeston. It's about the size of this stage. My whole family still lives there. My mother, my brother, his wife. It's about 25,000. It's equidistant between St. Louis and Memphis, which means it's too far from either one to go anywhere and do anything. And so my early exposure to the arts came in two forms, at school and on television. And I was born in 1956, and the world has changed immeasurably in both of those areas. Public school arts education in the 60s, when I was in elementary school, was a serious proposition. Even in a town the size of this stage, we had a band, we had an orchestra, we had a chorus, we had a drama club, I did plays. There was what was called a community concert series, which actually brought in touring artists to the junior high school gymnasium. And there was television. In those days, there were 3 networks. We didn't get public television when I grew up. The signal was too far away. This was before cable television. But all of the networks showed serious artistic programming, not an enormous amount of it, but a considerable amount of it, in prime time. On Saturday, I first saw ballet on television. And I read about it in the news magazines. In these days, Time and Newsweek covered the arts, not just as something they did on occasion, but routinely, regularly. And so a small town boy from southeast Missouri could feel that he had a sense of what was happening out there in the world and could become curious about it. And could, as I did, want to pursue it, to make it what he did for his life. And that's what I did. I started playing violin in the school orchestra, taught myself bass, started playing in a rock and roll band and a bluegrass band, classical music. I decided I wanted to be a musician, edited the high school newspaper, acted badly in plays. Mm-hmm. It was all there for me in this small town. The world has changed, and the world in this respect has not changed for the better. The kind of natural, easy access that one could have in the life of a boy from a small town, it's just not as easy as it was in the 60s.
When you came to rest at William Jewell College up in upstate Missouri from Sykeston, were you thinking of a career in the arts, or did you study art in college?
Well, by then I knew, or thought I knew, I was going to be a musician. I call myself a recovering musician. I was a music. I started out as a music major, and I expected to be a performing musician, and I did. I became a professional bassist. But I think it was the second year I was there. I was writing for the school paper. I was always writing. All my life I've been writing. And the chairman of the music department, a very enlightened man, a great choral conductor named Wesley Forbes, just died last year. He called me into his office and he said, you love music and you could make a life in that, but you also like to write. Have you ever thought of becoming a music critic? And believe me, I hadn't. It was like taking an arrow right in the forehead. And he said, I can set up an independent study for you with somebody interesting. Who he set it up with was the man who was the chief music critic of the Kansas City Star. So I spent a semester working with him for course credit. It was in the spring semester. That summer, while I was home earning money to go back to school, he grew ill. He had cancer. And when I came back in the fall, he was dying. So I only saw him once or twice after that. But before he died, he told the man who was going to become his replacement about me. And so, as an undergraduate at William Jewell College, I became the second string classical music critic of the Kansas City Star.
Did all papers have classical music critics back then?
every paper of any significance in a city the size of Kansas City had a staff critic and usually a stringer, which is somebody who's not on the staff but is paid per piece, and devoted serious coverage to all of the arts. We actually had the Kansas City Star at that time had an architecture critic who was quite a well-known expert on Frank Lloyd Wright, for example. Harry Haskell, who was my superior then at the Star, went on to become an editor at Yale University Press. These were serious people.
It's a sort of a chicken and egg kind of thing. What do you think is the cause of the demise of roles like that in local newspapers? Does it have something to do with education and less arts education, or does less arts education have to do with the demise of critical writing in newspapers?
Well, you put your finger on it right up at the front. It is a chicken and egg problem. There are interlocking causes that explain this decline. One of them is the undeniable fact that arts education is declining in the United States. If I'm remembering correctly, the National Endowment for the Arts, in its surveys of arts participation, says that the percentage of people who have had any form of arts education has gone down, I think, 38% in the last 25, 30 years. That's a big number. That's a real big number. And everything we know about participation in the arts tells us that if you are not exposed to the fine arts when you are young, it reduces significantly the chance that you will take an interest in them when you grow up. It stands to reason, but of course not everything that stands to reason is true. This is true. But there is more to it than that. I mean, we have also seen in our lifetimes a breakup of what people who write about culture call the common culture. The notion that everybody in America, there are things that everybody ought to know, books that everyone ought to have read, experiences that everyone ought to have. The very notion that there are certain kinds of art that even if you don't like them, you should respect them. You should take them seriously. My mother and father did not listen to classical music, but they didn't have contempt for people who did. They didn't make fun of them. And when I came in one day, how I became a classical violinist, I saw David Oistrakh, who was one of the greatest Russian violinists of the 20th century, play a recital on television, on CBS, one Sunday afternoon. There was a time in the 50s and 60s when there was cultural programming on the networks on Sunday afternoons. It was called the Culture Ghetto. And I saw Oistrakh playing. He was playing the Brahms D minor Sonata, Opus 108. And I said to myself, this is cool. I think maybe I want to do this. And my school gave a musical aptitude test to everybody in the 5th grade to decide if he would be encouraged to play an instrument in 6th grade. I aced it, and I said, I want to play the violin. So I said this to my parents, who were small town people who had probably never heard a symphony in their lives. They didn't make fun. They weren't shocked. They said, okay, what do we do? Where do we go? This bespeaks, it's just a little sliver of what it means to have a common culture where everybody accepts that some things are special, that some things are important, that what's in a museum is a good thing, that museums themselves are a good thing, that concert halls, and that even if you don't love what's there, even if you aren't involved with it, that you might want to support it. You might even want to support it to the extent of giving money to it. This world is full of people who have given large amounts of money to support orchestra concerts that they would never have wanted to, at least not willingly, because they believed that it was a good thing for the community, it was a good thing for people. This cultural consensus has crumbled in your lifetime and my lifetime. And when that happens, it becomes very difficult to go to people and say, give us money, this is a good thing.
And it undermines the case for arts and public education as well.
Yes, you better believe it does.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a truism that when the money gets tight, art is the first thing that gets tossed off the back of the slide.
Okay, you're right. But if there were a higher degree, if there were today, the kind of cultural consensus that there was in the 50s and early 60s about the significance of art, it wouldn't get tossed off the back of the slide that fast.
Does cultural consensus indicate some broader agreement to respect an authority that is predominant, even though it's sort of tacit? I mean, where do you get a common culture that's revered enough so that people who don't like it can still respect it? It's an attitude problem.
It is an attitude problem. You get it. If you live in a culture where everybody says that everything is as good as everything else, that there is no scale of quality, that some things, better is a tricky term. I mean, Raymond Chandler, the mystery writer, is a wonderful writer. I mean, he's a wonderful writer, but he's not Goethe, you know? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't insult either one of them to say that, to believe that there is a hierarchy of possibility, and that Mozart and Shakespeare and George Balanchine and Cezanne and people like that, they're up here somewhere. The thing about the culture of my youth is that it was a culture of aspiration. It was a culture in which people said to themselves, you know what, they're up there, but I can understand them, I can come to them. And I can also bring what I like, and I don't have to stop liking what I like, because I like that too. I can like a whole lot of things and take a whole lot of things seriously. But I understand that it's a bigger deal to have written Hamlet than it is to write, I don't know, an episode of Two and a Half Men. I mean, because of course there is a crude reductionist sense in which it is the same thing. You know, they're both dramas. You know? But if you don't know that one is better than the other, then you haven't made the big discovery. The problem is that there are people in the world who believe that there's no such thing as better.
Yeah, right.
And if that's the case, then all bets are off, and then you're down the road, which ultimately leads to not having arts education at all.
What kind of case can you make in an egalitarian society to say that the idea of better shouldn't be heaved overboard as we talk about political equality?
The case you make is the profoundly, radically democratic case, which is that everybody can come to the arts, that the arts can ennoble every life, that they are. I don't like to say the arts are good for you. I do actually think that they are. But I prefer to say it in a different way. They make you happy. They give you pleasure. And this is not a trivial thing. It's not, we were talking about this at lunch today. It's not like being tickled. Ooh, that feels good. They make you happy in the most profound way possible, a life-transforming way. They make the world bigger. They make your sense of possibility bigger. And that's the message that you bring. I mean, you don't get people, you cannot persuade a person, you can't say to a person who doesn't know who Stravinsky is, who doesn't know who Shakespeare is, you can't say to them, you are a dumb. And if you want to get smart, you better find out about these guys. This may be true, but it is not a persuasive communication. What you have to do is you have to come to them and you have to say, try this because you've never had anything like this before. And it's really, you're going to like it. It's going to be exciting. I'll tell you something I actually saw myself. This was 2 years ago in Orlando. I was in Orlando doing a residency at the Rollins College there, and there are two good theater companies in Orlando, Florida. And Orlando Shakespeare was doing a production of Hamlet. My brother and his wife were visiting us. Now my brother, you wouldn't pick us out of a lineup. He's got red hair and he walks and talks like John Wayne. He runs the maintenance department of a trucking company, and he is the greatest guy in the world. And I honestly don't know the last time he's read a book, and I'm sort of afraid to ask if he's ever read any of my books. I'm not sure I want to hear the answer. But he's a great guy. He's an intelligent guy. And I knew that Orlando Shakespeare didn't do Shakespeare in togas. And so I said, you guys want to come see Hamlet? Because I'm covering it. And they said, sure. So we were in a theater, not unlike this one, a little bit larger than this one, but there wasn't, the first row of seats was actually on the same level as the performance space. And we were in the first row. Now this was a Hamlet with blood and stage mist, trapdoors, all the stuff I really like. It was a Shakespeare production that took the dramatic values of Shakespeare seriously and made it what it is. It's a story. There's a great old song called "That's Entertainment," it's about how all the different forms of art are at base all entertainment. And it's talking about Shakespeare, and it says, "Some great Shakespearean scene where a ghost and a prince meet, and everyone ends in mincemeat." Well, that was this Hamlet. So we're sitting there, and I'm reviewing, so I'm paying attention. Look out of the corner of my eye at my brother, and he is totally enthralled. And I know it's the first time he's ever seen Shakespeare before. He was thrilled out of his gourd. QED. You don't tell people you're dumb if you don't like this. You say to them, try this, it's cool. And then you believe it, you trust it. You believe that Shakespeare has something to say to all men in all conditions, because it's the truth. That's what we do in an egalitarian society. That's how we bring arts to the people in a democratic society. We trust in their power. We trust in their universality. And then we turn them loose.
Not to dwell on the problems of arts education, but where's the disconnect? That seems so straightforward. It seems like something that could happen in a classroom setting with relative ease.
I don't understand that. Honestly, all of you, I don't mean to have you report to me about bad teachers, but I'm sure that you have been in classes that were taught by people who had apparently forgotten why it was that they cared about the thing that they were teaching. Would this be an experience as universal as Hamlet? I know it's happened to me before.
Someone should write a drama about that.
Yeah, right.
A tragedy.
Actually, there's a play on Broadway right now called Seminar. Alan Rickman is in it. It's by Teresa Rivett, about a writing teacher who is himself a failed novelist and lives to destroy the egos of the students. I'm a critic, but I think you may have already gotten the idea that I'm not that kind of critic. Yes, I will drop the big one if necessary. But I see what I do as a form of teaching, and I want to do the kind of teaching in my reviewing that I'm talking about right here. I want to, when I feel enthusiasm for the experience, I want to put it on the page so that the people that read my piece say, I gotta go see this, if that's the appropriate message to be said.
Right. And there's a difference between that and being a cheerleader for something that isn't worth cheering about.
You know what? If you cheer for everything, nobody will believe you when it's good. Your bad review, when appropriate, is what buys you the credibility to say that something is good. And I tell the truth. I don't go out of my way to fly to Podunk and see Podunk reps Hamlet, knowing that it's not going to be any good, so I can write a bad review of it. But when you may not realize this about me, I don't just review in New York. I'm the only drama critic in America who reviews all over the United States. I see 100 shows a year, and 50 of them are outside New York. I go everywhere. Haven't been to Alaska yet, but there's 2 companies there that I've got my eye on. No theater in Montana, as far as I know.
So you can retire to Montana and open a company.
That's right. Oh yeah, that would be a great way to wreck the end of your life. Don't try this at home. But you know what? I do that because I have learned. I've spent 6 years living out of a suitcase, And I know that there is great theater everywhere. The theater in Chicago is better than the theater in New York. Oh, they hate that when I say that in New York. It's true. There's great theater everywhere. And my mission is to show up on your doorstep and say, okay, lay it on me, and then report back. And I just sent an email to a little bitty company in Chicago. They've never had any kind of publicity like this, and I got tipped that they have a good show coming. I just sent I sent them an email that just said, I'm interested in coming to see your production of Floyd Collins for the Wall Street Journal. Could you get in touch with me? And I love that. That's the best thing I do.
I bet you get replies pretty quick.
Real fast. I expect to hear from them by dinner time, yes. But that's, you must realize from spending 20 minutes with me that I am an enthusiastic person. I am not in any way burned out about what I do. I get excited every time I walk into a theater. Does it always last? No. Moss Hart of Copland and Hart, the guys who wrote, You Can't Take It With You and The Man Who Came to Dinner, Moss Hart said that every audience will give every play 15 minutes. And they're prepared to have a great time. And at the end of minute number 15, if it's not working, you can hear the door close, and it's all over. In all of my reviewing for the Wall Street Journal, I have only changed my mind about a new play at intermission once. And I remember how astonished I was when that happened. It was Martin McDonagh's The Pill Man. And in intermission, I was saying to myself, what the hell is this? And by the end of the day, I knew I was going home to write a rave. You've always got to leave it's my job to leave the door open as long as I can. But you can hear that door close at the end of 15 minutes if they haven't got you. But anyway, I'm in the enthusiasm business, and that's what teachers have to do. And I know it's hard. What could be harder? What's harder than being a teacher? But what's more fulfilling? I do a little bit of teaching. I love it. I'm a completely frustrated teacher. And to me, there is nothing more exciting than seeing the light go on in somebody. It's thrilling. And you live for that.
I'll say there is no teacher who isn't a frustrated teacher. Just one of the teachers who are frustrated. But how did you get to the Wall Street Journal from the start?
They asked me. There were many intervening steps, and among other things, I sort of mutated from being a music critic into being a drama critic. After a very confused interlude of 2 years where I thought I wanted to become a psychotherapist, and actually spent 2 years studying at the University of Illinois, and I spent a year working on the graveyard shift of a suicide line. I'm writing a play about that, actually. That was I remember every call I got, but I realized, no, this is not right, and that I was kind of fleeing from being a writer, like fleeing the hound of heaven. So I got back on the track, and I sent an application, and sort of ended up in New York. I became an intern at Harper's Magazine. As soon as I got to New York, it was like the key turned in the door, that things started to work. And I built up a career as a writer. I spent several years at the New York Daily News working on my day job. Believe it or not, I wrote foreign policy editorials for the New York Daily News while establishing myself as an arts critic and then as a biographer. And I reached the point where I didn't have to have a day job. Between book advances and freelance work, I could pay the rent. And by 9 years ago, whenever 9 years ago was, what is that, 2014? I forget, I can't count. But by 9 years ago, I was pretty well known doing what I was doing. And I got a call from Paul Gigot, who was the editorial page editor of the Wall Street Journal. The Journal has an unusual institutional structure. Arts reports to editorial. So Paul asked me to lunch. I've been writing for the Journal forever. He said, I want to discuss the paper's arts coverage with you. Okay, sure. So I go to lunch, and 30 minutes in, he drops the bomb and says, we'd like you to try being our drama critic. And I said, well, Paul, I think I know a pretty fair amount about theater. I did a lot of it in school, and I write about it. I've never been a working critic. Why don't we just try this as an experiment? And we shook hands, and that was 9 years ago. So I guess the experiment worked. But that's how it happened. That's exactly how it happened. And within 3 weeks, I knew that I had found the job of jobs. Because I write about all the arts, I'm interested in all the arts. You know, my biographies are of H.L. Mencken, the journalist, George Balanchine, the choreographer, Louis Armstrong, the jazz musician. I collect art. And theater is the universal art, the one that brings together all arts, the synthesis of the arts. And if you're a drama critic, you can use everything you know, not just about the arts, but about the world. It's a perfect job. And I loved it. I felt immediately a sense of mission. And it was deepened when the Journal, 2 years later, said to me, we'd like you to think about trying some out-of-town reviewing, since we are a national newspaper. And I had no idea that I was going to become America's drama critic, but it happened. And except for the air travel, I love it.
You do a review of every Broadway opening, right?
I review all Broadway openings. In between them, I can go anywhere in the United States to do anything I want, insofar as I can fit it in and not drop dead in the process.
I had somebody tell me that Broadway was really more of a tourist industry than a theatrical business.
It's a theme park. It's a theme park. It's the greatest theme park in the world, and sometimes it's more than that because of the concentration of resources and the fact that everybody wants to be there and just the sheer excitement of being there, because the theater district is a very exciting place to be. When everything works and the show is serious, or it's a serious piece of fluff. I mean, I love musicals. I have no contempt for musicals. They are a great American art form, but when everything is right and the balloon goes up on Broadway, it really goes up. But most of the time, you're seeing superannuated Hollywood star B looking to revive his career by appearing in a revival of overdone play C. This is not, in my opinion, a formula for great theater, although it is a formula for ticket sales.
Is that why we're seeing Daniel Radcliffe and Scarlett Johansson? And
you just picked the worst examples. Daniel Radcliffe can dance. Are you surprised? I was. You could have ratcheted my jaw back up into place. And he sings pretty well, too, quite respectably. Not Bobby Morse, but he was terrific. And all the reviews that said otherwise were by snobby theater critics. The worst sin in the world as a critic is to write a piece about the show in your head instead of the one on the stage. Well, I saw the show on the stage and Daniel Radcliffe was good. And Scarlett Johansson, she was in The View from the Bridge. She was so interior, so self-directed in that. When she came out on stage, I didn't recognize her at first. She's a serious actor. Now, if you want to ask me about Julie Roberts, that's a different thing. Bless her heart. And the best movie star appearance I ever saw on Broadway was when Claire Danes was in Pygmalion. I had no idea. I had just seen a whole run of awful TV movie star appearances on Broadway, and I'm braced for the worst. And she came out and she killed. She just killed. I was awestruck. So never say never. Never ever say never. Although the odds are against it.
You know, one of the first things back in the early days of the NEA that their theater program did was they sent Gregory Peck on his dime, basically, out on a tour of regional theaters to sort of take the pulse of regional theater in the country and get an idea of what the NEA could do for it. What sense do you get of regional theater? Is it thriving, and is it contributing to the artistic and cultural landscape of the country?
You better believe it. Regional theater is where the real action is in American theater. It is against long odds. The money is short. It's rough out there. People are playing safer these days. You can see the programming changing in regional theaters. I mean, in some of them, they are switching to the pander mode. Others are just pulling it in a little bit and being safer. But basically, when the NEA started, regional theater was just beginning an efflorescence. And today, there is serious theater in every major city in the United States. There is theater of the highest possible quality. There's more of it in some places than others. There's a lot in Chicago. There's a lot in Washington. There's a lot in San Francisco. There's less in other places. But I saw, the biggest surprise I ever got was when I went to Greenville, one of the Carolinas. I'm sorry, I traveled too much. Thank you. And they had a company called Triad Stage did Tobacco Road, a play that had not been revived in, I don't know, 20 years, 30 years, 100 years. And I went down there because that's what I do. I thought, okay, they're doing Tobacco Road, gotta check this out. Blew me out of the seat, it was so good. It was so good. You can find it everywhere. This country is full of people who believe passionately in the expressive power and significance of theater and want to bring it to people who maybe don't have anything else exciting. You know, every city can't have a symphony orchestra, they cost too much. Every city can't have a ballet company, they really cost too much. You know what though, you can have serious theater anywhere in the world that there's this much room and a third as many seats as we've got here. And it can be something that you'll see, it'll change your life.
I think I hear you saying this, but does theater occupy a unique spot in the cultural life of a civic body?
It can. It depends on the civic body.
Does it have something special to offer that the visual arts and the symphonies and the ballets don't? Is there something about seeing something?
It has something to offer that the visual arts can't offer. But all performing arts have this thing to offer, and that is the communion of souls. The fact that you are all in the same place with the performers, the thing that film cannot offer. You are breathing their air, and that's the magic. That's where the magic comes from. That's where it matters. Theater is a social art, and because it is a verbal art, it's more accessible. I mean, there are people in the world who, bless their hearts, they're never going to get Mozart. You know, he just doesn't come to them, and that's fine. You know, we are all different in our capacities and attributes. But there's just not a person in the world who isn't going to get Macbeth if it's presented in a way that makes sense and that is theatrically alive. And that kind of experience, that's the vitamin T of the civic community. That irreplaceable vitamin that theater can provide, which is this communion of people coming together in a public place to experience a life-transforming event. There is nothing like it. Nothing.
Did the Greeks understand that?
I bet they did. Of course they did. I mean, it was, if anything, even more central to the polis than it is now here. I mean, theater was part of the air they breathed. And there have been times in American culture, in the century just passed. Okay, I realize I'm dealing with a young audience, so I will make a slight adjustment. Do you all know who Johnny Carson was? The Tonight Show, he was Jay Leno's predecessor.
Jay Leno's first.
Right, okay. Everybody, the Tonight Show in those days was part of the common culture. It was something that everybody watched. Edward Albee, the man who wrote Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, guested on that show. He was on the same night as Duke Ellington. Okay, a culture where that can happen is a culture where people are aware of the significance of theater. We don't have that now.
Is the problem that culture has been turned into something simply to sell a product? Because I think, Duke Ellington comes on the Tonight Show, he doesn't have anything to sell. And I don't see anybody on the Tonight Show now that's not plugging a book or a movie or something like that.
Well, I mean, Duke would have been plugging a record. Albee was plugging his play. There is no lack of dignity in selling the fruits of your labor as an artist. They got to eat too. It's that when we were talking a minute ago about the culture of aspiration, the idea that even if I've never seen Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and remember it was made into a Hollywood movie that was a big hit, so I can choose another way. But even if I never see a production of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, I ought to know who Edward Albee is because he's an important playwright. And it's part of what I am as an American, is to know stuff like that. I ought to respect him, even if I don't enjoy him, even if I can't appreciate him. That's the sea change. That is what has changed. This sense that we all ought to try harder, we all ought to know more. There was an old song from a movie called Going My Way, called Swinging on a Star, where the refrain says, you can be better than you are. I wonder how much we feel that way about culture. Of course, we want to make more money, and we have it of the very best of authority. Dr. Johnson said there's no pursuit more harmless in the world than making money. But we also ought to want to know more, and to know more about art, and to let art into us, and to change us, to irradiate us. And I don't get the feeling, perhaps I am wrong about this, and I'm sure I'm wrong about all of you, because this is a different kind of place. This is a college, you are here. But my impression is that generally speaking in the culture, people aspire less than they did 30 years ago.
Is it because of the therapeutic nature? I'm okay, you're okay, we don't need to get any better?
The Garrison Keillor, like Wobegon theory, everybody's, better than average. I forget how it goes, but
I mean, you horrify people today if you tell them that half of all children are below average.
yes, that's a problem. But I do. Okay, there's probably a fixed upper percentage of the number of people in America who can appreciate him. That's probably true, right? But we're not even close to that number. We can keep trying for a long time before we hit that number. We're not trying at all. I mean, individual theater companies are trying. The schools are not trying. Increasingly, they are not saying, we want to send you to something. We want you to see this. We want you to find out what this is like. This is happening less. I've suspected this happened less in your lives, and all of you, somehow, for some reason, you got the message anyway, but it was harder for you than it is for me. Thus, I esteem you. It was almost dropped in my lap, even in my little town.
You gave this presentation the wonderfully provocative title, Does American Culture Have a Future, right? What do you mean when you say that? Doesn't a culture sort of take care of itself?
Well, when I say that, what I mean is high culture. And I'm not saying that in a snobby way, because I think you all have guessed that I'm not snobby about the arts. But I do think that high culture, if it disappears from the larger culture, it's like you've stopped taking vitamin C. You will wither. And classical music isn't going to die. Shakespeare isn't going to be forgotten. The opera won't cease to exist. But there are cities where it will cease to exist. There are symphony orchestras and drama companies closing down in medium-sized cities all over the country. And there is no substitute for the immediate experience of that communion of souls that I was talking about. If you see it on television, that's great, and it is so much better than nothing. I can't even begin to say. But when you get right down to it, there's no substitute for being angry. And I am fearful. I am fearful for the health of a culture that doesn't believe in the necessity of bringing these experiences. And because theater is the cheap one, the poor one, the one that can be done with the least resources, you get the most bang for the least number of bucks. Maybe it is theater that becomes the missionary, that you can bring it to people in a way that you can't bring a symphony orchestra.
You used the phrase high culture. Is popular culture the opposite of high culture?
No, it is not. Popular culture, they both come in all shades. You know, there are bad operas. There are great mysteries. If it's a Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlapping space in the middle of those two things. It's not a false distinction, but it is a continuum. I've quoted the line from That's Entertainment, and it is absolutely true, again, that Hamlet and the guys who write sitcoms are, in one sense, doing the same thing. And the sitcom can be actually a great classical art form. I'm not joking about that. It can be, because it's orderly, it has fixed rules, it can be quite a wonderful thing. And we have all seen, in your lifetimes, we've seen cable television attain a level of seriousness that was not conceivable, dramatic series for the television of my youth. A show like The Wire would not have been possible in 1965. It just wouldn't have existed. So there are only certain contexts in which I would discuss the difference between high culture and pop culture. They're all trying to be beautiful. High culture has more ingredients. It has more headroom. It's trying to do something bigger. It aspires higher. And that is to be taken seriously even when it fails. Even when it fails. Just in the crudest form of measurement, a 30-minute symphony is a more ambitious enterprise than a 3-minute single. It just is. You know what? It's harder to do that. There are lots of 3-minute singles that are greater works of art than 30-minute symphonies. Nevertheless, one set of people is trying to do something harder, something bigger. Aspiration, and they're to be taken seriously for that. Paul McCartney has taken to writing symphonies and oratorios. I regret to tell you that they are frightful, but good for him. Elvis Costello wrote a really good ballet score, no fool. And I thought to myself, wow, that's a guy with brains. Good for him. Every time somebody tries to do something that they've never tried before, good for them. And if it's harder, good for them. What is, you took me on the visit to the Browning library. A man's reach must exceed his grasp, else what's a heaven for?
I'll tell you what, why don't we open up the floor to questions and see if we can bring in some more people into our conversation.
I like that. Raise your hand. Yeah.
I'm just interested. You're talking about this culture that was so unified as when you were younger, and I think we've seen kind of a social fragmentation. And so, how do we go back to unifying the arts for everyone when, for instance, we have great writers, great artists, Sarah Rule, Annie Baker. Even if we put them on Jay Leno's no longer for everyone.
Right.
And so
there's nothing for everyone.
Right.
I don't know how we deal with that, except that we say, this is the problem we have to deal with. That there is no Johnny Carson. There is no old Ed Sullivan show that everybody watched on Sunday night. There's nothing that everybody sees. There's nothing that everybody reads. That means we have to work harder. And I want to say something right now. I don't romanticize the comic culture. It was an exclusive culture in more than one sense of the word, including the bad sense. And the gatekeepers of that culture, they kept a lot of doors closed. Every virtue has its reciprocal defect. I know that. But the good side of it was that there were things that did get out to everybody, and that everybody did accept that there were some things that were important. There were things that everybody ought to know. And people who were in excluded minority cultures did not therefore say, okay, it's not for me. James Baldwin didn't say that. You know what he did? He sat down and wrote Go Tell It on the Mountain. He walked into the forbidden art form and made it his own. That's how the culture of aspiration can work for everybody. And that's the power of a comic culture. If it's done right, it doesn't exclude and invites. It says everybody gets to play this game. We have to get that message out. It's not as easy. It will probably never be that easy again. On the other hand, there are more avenues of transmission. You've got to send the message on a lot of different signals, but there are more signals to send it on now. So we have to take advantage of this changed situation that way.
I was just going to actually kind of piggyback on what you said. I've noticed over the past 10 years of my life, and I'm fairly young still, that technology has just taken over everything, every aspect of our life. What do you think that has to do with the culture in your department? Because that's something I've noticed in my own personal life, is that while we are going forward, I think we're really taking a few steps back. Is that something you agree with?
Yes and no. Guns don't kill people. We will kill people. You know what? The great thing about theater is that it is the simplest of technologies. But you can also be Radiohead and take a very complex and involved technology and make art out of that too. Technology, it's just a device. We use it. We humanize it. We make the most out of it. We can be artisans and say that we want things to be simple. And that's great. But complicated art, technologically elaborate art, that can be good too. I noticed that in the food department, we seem to be getting back to simplicity. So maybe that is a direction that we're going to go in. But we mustn't be afraid of the technological tools. We must take them over. We must use them we must humanize them. We must use them for the humanist ends that art fulfills, and to send the messages that we want to send. I'm 56 years old, but you know what? I was the first national arts writer to start a blog anywhere. I am so proud of that, because I looked at that technology and I said, I can do that, and I need to be here. And I've been blogging without cease for, Lord, like 9 years. I think 9 years.
And you can't stop now.
No, I'm stuck. It's an addiction. Other questions on this side of the room? Somebody raise a hand, please. Yes.
I guess I'm sort of piggybacking off of your question a little bit.
Speak loud.
Sorry. Okay. I suppose what I'm thinking about is American culture seems, or Americans, I guess our narrative is the sort of rags to riches, progression, moving forward, forging a future, not obsessing over the past.
Right.
Always doing and never sort of sitting back and stopping to
And
take stock of
reconstructing identities. The quintessential character of American literature is Jay Gatsby.
Right. It seems to me, though, that sort of move toward constant progress sort of prevents the sorts of high culture you're talking about from happening. Because I feel like you need to stop always pushing forward in order to create something that sort of considers what that progress means.
Well, look at the 20th century, though. I mean, this most wildest and most progressive of centuries was also a century when American art came into its own. I mean, this country is what it is. It's a country where the roots of art are shallow because of the way we were started. You know, the frontier settlements, people didn't have time for art. A Puritan heritage where people actually distrust beauty and fear it. And yet, we created Tennessee Williams, we created Aaron Copland, I mean, I can just go on and on and on about the list of major artists that we created. Yes, of course, art is reflective, and we do have to make space to contemplate. The hardest thing in the world is to be contemplative in a country like this, at a time like this. But it is doable. And we have found a distinctive way of making art that reflects our complexities and our difficulties and our disadvantages. I think actually American art is very distinctive in all kinds of different ways. There is a national character. It's just a lot more complex than we thought it was 50 years ago. And our art reflects that. Our theater most definitely reflects that. We mustn't be afraid of making art that reflects what we are, that shows what we are, good sides, bad sides. Even that we are a society that is trying to get more and accumulate more and do more. And sometimes that leads to big, huge, ambitious art. Sometimes that leads to giant canvases and huge musicals, and some of them are good too. It is what it is. The country is what it is. And the impulse to make art and appreciate it, I think, is deeply rooted in the human organism. So we're always going to have art. Somehow it's going to be reflective of the qualities that you're describing too, for better and for worse, I suspect.
I'm sort of building on something you mentioned at lunch about how we need to build good audiences. You might say a teacher isn't someone who has someone read books, it's someone who makes good readers. So in what ways can artists create art that helps build a good audience instead of just filling the chairs? And then also in what way can we, sort of on the other side of the communion of souls, be good audience members?
Well, artists don't make art to build audiences. They make art because they can't not. They do what they must. But one thing I think that makes a difference is for artists to present themselves as normal. And I don't mean normal like they act normal. I mean that they present the making of art as a normal part of life. When I was a kid, Leonard Bernstein used to do children's concerts on television. They were called young people's concerts. They were probably the most influential cultural thing that ever happened to classical music in this country. And one day, there was a program, it was about American music. And he brought Aaron Copland, the greatest American classical composer of the 20th century, on to conduct the last movement of his Third Symphony. And Copland was just wearing a business suit, not, the monkey suit. He was just this guy. And Aaron Copland was the least prepossessing looking man who ever lived. And he comes out, and he waves this stick, and he directs this orchestra in this piece that he wrote. And part of the message was that this guy in a suit, who doesn't look like Superman and doesn't have long hair, and there isn't anything unusual about him, he makes art too. Artists need not to be afraid to get out there in the world and say to people, this is my work. This is how I earn a living. This is a normal thing that I do, and it's something that you might like. You can even buy some of it. It's very important. I mean, the art itself, they're always going to make the art that they want to make, and believe me, when you try to make art whose specific intention is to please people, you will get crap. No, you make the art that you want to make, but then people will like it or they won't like it. But you must bring it to them, and you must not be afraid to bring it to them. And you must be willing to talk to them about it, and not be embarrassed to explain to them about it, and not make them think that they're dumb to not understand it. Artists are going to have to be spokesmen for their arts. They're all going to have to be teachers. Every artist is now in the business of audience development. That's just the way it is. Everybody who gives a concert, used to be, you give a classical concert, you walk out, you're wearing the monkey suit, and you don't say a word. You sit down at the piano and play for 2 hours. Okay, fine. But you know what? Increasingly, people want you to step off the stage, like I have just done, and to speak to you and say, I am a person, and this is what I'm doing. I've written 2 operas with Paul Moravec, who won the Pulitzer Prize a few years ago. Paul is so good at this. He's a funny, self-deprecating man. He does impersonations. He does the best John Lennon I've ever heard. And when he's talking to an audience about a new piece of his, he's just this nice, big, funny guy who's talking about his piece. He is normal. He is part of your realm of experience. He explains to you that he's written a piece called Tempest Fantasy. That's what he won the Pulitzer Prize for. It's inspired by characters in The Tempest. And, here are the themes. Clarinet, play this. This is going to be aria. This is going to be Prospero. And you can just feel the audience come to him. And then they play the piece of music, and the audience, they go there. Everybody who makes art has got to learn how to do that now. you must develop your audiences. Can't do without it.
I was very interested in how you spoke about Sunday afternoon being a culture ghetto.
Oh, yeah.
And being interested in performance studies the way I am. I have, of course, well, now Sunday afternoon is, of course, NFL football. And, you know, for those of you who don't know, the University of Albany recently removed its theater department, but kept its football team. And so I wonder if what we used to be getting in terms of a communal experience culturally from theater and arts, we're now getting from sports. Because as we're losing and shuttering theater companies and as arts are being pushed off the sled, as you mentioned, right or wrong, schools are doing everything they can to save sports programs.
That's right. To the point of looking the other way when a child is raped.
Absolutely.
Well, I have nothing but contempt for that, of course. But it's true. It's an audience, and it's a show. The only difference is that unless I'm missing something, and I'm not a great football fan, I'm not aware that there is anything transcendent in the experience of playing a football game. That's what we have to tell people. We have something better, different. Our blood is fake, but we can, usually, but we can put you in touch with a part of you that you don't know anything about. I mean, there have always been, since the gladiators, you know, there's always been, and maybe that's a fundamental urge too. I don't know. I've just never been interested in sports. Being left-handed and terminally clumsy, sports have never been a part of my life. And I don't have contempt for sports. I tell people that ballet is my baseball. You know, I've got a team I root for, New York City Ballet. I know the players, but you know, I have no contempt for that at all. But any university that would do that deserves. What's 3 stages up from contempt? Annihilating contempt. They are perverting the fundamental historic mission of the university. They are being untrue to their code. It's very close to evil. Very close to evil.
I'm curious as your opinion. You talked about this idea of high art and status and things like Mozart and Shakespeare, these things that we look back on in our history, and there's the status.
Not status. I don't care about the status.
But more what their work has done for our society, for our culture.
Okay.
Well, I'm curious as your opinion as a critic and as an experienced theater goer, who has the promise now? Who have you seen lately?
You mean in theater, people who write
theater
plays?
or music or ballet, things, who? I'm just
there's
curious
all sorts of people.
your opinion, who you're.
There's all kinds of. Let me come at your question from another direction and say that there are dances being made, there are pieces of music being written, there are plays being written that it may well be that in 50 years and 100 years, we will look back and I will be able to say, I reviewed the New York premiere of Lynn Nottage's Ruined, to take one example. I was there. I saw the New York premiere of Paul Taylor's dance, Piazzolla Caldera. Of course, he's an established figure, but I mean, we have not reached a point where there is no great new art being made. I mean, I collaborate with a man, Paul Moravec, whom I actually think is a great composer. Great like, Benjamin Britten, great like Bartok, great like, he'll never be forgotten, even though he can imitate John Lennon. It's happening all over. I mean, I could give you a list of names, but
But it hasn't happened yet, is what you're saying.
Well, it never happens immediately. I mean, there is no such thing as a masterpiece that makes itself totally manifest on the first performance and everybody in the room says, that's it. It's going to live forever. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they felt that way at the opening night of The Glass Menagerie. There have been a few plays where you read the reviews and you say, well, jeepers, they got it. They really did. Glass Menagerie is one of them, as a matter of fact. But great art's not in the past. It's happening now, too. We were talking about the movie Ratatouille at lunch, and remember the critic, Anton Ego, who, for 7/8 of the film, is the worst sort of caricature of, you know, the evil critic. But remember the last scene? Remember the last scene? When he says that, you know, yes, everything bad that you hear about critics is true, but there is something we can do that nobody else can do, and that is that we can be on the side of something new that is good. That's my job. And it doesn't just mean a new play. It also means a company that you've never heard of, an actor you've never seen, a great revival of a play that has been forgotten, or a great revival of a play that you thought you knew backwards and forwards. My proudest achievement as a drama critic is I am the guy who spread the word about David Cromer when he was in Chicago. And they didn't know from David Cromer in the New York Times. And because I go to Chicago, I saw his production Picnic, and I said to myself, whoever this guy is, he's a genius. And then he brings his Our Town to New York. I felt real good that week. I felt real good, but I couldn't have felt that way if I didn't travel. I owe this to the Wall Street Journal. They pay my expenses. They're the ones who said to me, get out of town. We're a national newspaper, and we'll pay the ticket. Hooray for them. They allow me to do this. Without them, I don't do this. Anybody over here? I hunger to answer your impertinent question.
You mentioned Radiohead. Do you listen to a lot of contemporary music?
Not as much as I used to, because covering theater and now making theater. You know, I've written 2 operas. My first play opened in the fall and is transferring to New England. There's just less time in my life. There was a time when I went to the ballet 4 times a week. And at the end of that period in my life, I wrote a biography of George Balanchine. And then, I don't know, it was like I had a baby or a tumor had been removed. But, you know, suddenly I just thought, okay, I've got to do something else for a while. I am a musician. I've been as involved in music as it's possible to be. But now music, at least for this moment in my life, is less important than it was. I don't know, probably Radiohead was the last really unusual thing that I heard and said, oh, this is interesting. I've never heard anything like this. I'm not interested in it. Probably at some future point in my life, the clock will turn and I'll spend more time. My wife says, I didn't mean to marry a drama critic. I wanted you to be a music critic. And I said, tough luck, honey. The journal deals. It's in the nature of being somebody like me who is interested in all the arts and takes a deep interest in them, is the idea that you spend your life is in phases. I'm in a theater phase, you know, and it's gone to the point where I make something very unusual for critics. I'm making theater, so I figure I better go with it, you know. And then I always have friends who tit me and say, well, you better listen to Cat Power, you better listen to Radiohead. I have a young friend in Chicago who keeps me up on things, so it's about time that she checked in with something new that I should listen to. But I don't try to keep up with anything in the theater. I just let it happen, you know? There's only so many hours in the day, and I'm 56. But I never want to stop paying attention. And that's one of the reasons why I like talking to people like you, because you have experiences that I won't have on my own. And I can find out, you know, somebody can say to me, I get emails from people saying, have you heard so-and-so? Have you read so-and-so? Have you seen so-and-so? I'm much more likely to pay attention to that email if it comes from somebody who's younger than 30, because they're going to take me somewhere that I wouldn't have gotten. I always want to be, theater people say present. The actor is present. I try to be present as a critic, and I want to be present in the culture and know what is happening. I don't have to like it, but I want to know. But I can only do so much.
This is a kind of a short question. I once had a piano
Then I'll
teacher.
give you a long answer.
Okay. Who said that jazz could not reach the depths that classical music could. He was a classical music teacher himself.
Well, all I can say is he never
What
heard
would you
Charlie
say to
Parker
that?
playing Parker's movie.
Is he right?
No, of course he's wrong. Okay, I just gave you a cute answer. The serious answer is that a large-scale classical composition aspires to a kind of large-scale experience that jazz does not aspire to. But that doesn't mean that the jazz experience can't penetrate on its smaller scale. I'm writing a biography of Duke Ellington, a guy who actually grappled with this, a guy who tried unsuccessfully to write large-scale compositions. It just wasn't in him. But there are jazz composers today, including a good friend of mine, Maria Schneider, who are working in large-scale forms. And there's nothing inherent in the language of jazz that is incapable of expressing anything. It's more just a matter of the aspiration and the time scale. That's what I would say.
We also talked at lunch a little bit about how art can express or act as a window into transcendent truth, and you talked about the importance of that. How can we teach people about the importance, or what qualities can we point out to them that allows them to see that this is a window into something bigger, whether it's faith or just a transcendent beauty?
A.E. Housman, the guy who wrote The Shropshire Lad, he said that he knew it was poetry when he was shaving in the morning, and if he thought of the line that his skin prickled so he couldn't move the blade over his skin. The first signal that you're receiving a message that is coming from someplace unusual, maybe that's it. I get chills. Don't you get chills? I get chills in theater. I get them listening to music. You have to have the antenna up, you know? Because sometimes a work of art will show you something that you never imagined possible. And if you've got any sense at all, you need to be open to the possibility that that signal is a very long distance signal, you know? If you are religious, if this is the way that your turn of mind works. It's funny, I wrote a column last month in the Journal. Did you see this about the interesting fact that very unreligious people have written great religion? The Verdi Requiem was written by not just an unbeliever, but a good old village atheist, an anti-cleric. And Vaughan Williams, who wrote some of the most profoundly spiritual religious music we have, was a lifelong agnostic. The religious explanation of that is that they had been visited by grace, which comes, as you know if you've read Flannery O'Connor, unsought, and sometimes can seem to wreck your life in the process. To a person who doesn't admit the possibility of any transcendence at all, you're not going to get anywhere with them, I don't think, unless they have a really earth-shattering experience, you know, and that happens too. But mostly, I think it's just a matter of saying, when you go to the artistic experience, you have to be completely open. You have to be completely receptive to whatever is going to happen up there. You must be present. And if you are present, then grace may descend. And you can express that idea to people who are not, in fact, believers. You know? They can call it something else, like in AA, you know, it's the higher power. But believe or not believe, art tells us things, not just things that we didn't know, but things that we didn't even know were knowable. And it gives us feeling. C.S. Lewis wrote a book called An Experiment in Criticism. And in the very last page of this beautiful book, he says that the unique power of great literature, and of course he means all art, but he's talking about literature, is that it allows us to see through the eyes of others, millions of others, to be in them, to see the world as they see it. This is a especially powerful attribute of theater because it puts you in another place. And the great thing about theater as opposed to film is that with film, they have to do it with CGI and $1 million sets. And with theater, we can just do it right here on this little old stage with the platforms and 2 chairs and the table. And if we do it right, you're going to be wherever we want you to be. That's magic. And as soon as you start believing in magic, then you might believe in something else too. Well, this has been fun. All right. Oh, good. We got another one. Yeah.
Just to jump back to something you were saying a second ago about how you enjoy talking to people, knowing about like what's going on. There's a lovely show happening in Theater 11 tonight.
Oh, yeah, I was told about that.
Yeah, and if I've got a comp ticket, if you like.
I think they get me in. I'm at his mercy. He's the keeper of the schedule. But
I think you should go see it.
I think you should go.
well, we have time for dinner. When is dinner?
It's only 90 minutes. It starts at 7:30, and it features a play that you might have seen at Humana, Jeffrey Esserman's Three Romantics a few years ago.
No.
You have Shaker and Mark.
If it works, let's go. Okay.
You're invited.
Thank you very much.
You're both invited.
Unlike some visiting firemen, I like seeing theater even on my off nights. I really, if somebody asked me, I think it was at lunch or yesterday, I don't know, they said, don't you ever get tired of this? No, hell no. I never get tired of it. I really don't. Possibly it is because I became a drama critic in middle age. That may make a difference. I really feel like I fired another stage on the rocket. And even more so now that, you know, I'm making theater. There just is nothing more exciting for a middle-aged man than starting to do something he's never done before. That's really exciting, you know, because it makes you feel like, oh no, I'm not that old. There's life in the old boy yet. I think there's still some life in the old boy yet.
Thanks very much.